Welcome, I'm Jack Sotti. I've got 18 years worth of experience to share with you guys. So, what do you guys need to actually successfully make cocktails at home? Cocktails can be quite intimidating. There's a lot of shiny equipment, a lot of tools, a lot of glassware. You don't technically need everything, but I think the best place to start is to break down what everything does, and then you can see where you can make substitutions or hacks in the home. I think the overarching theme, there are two very key lessons from working in bars over the years. And the first one is very straightforward. Clean up as you go. It sounds so simple, and I feel stupid putting it into a masterclass, but after a couple of martinis and you've got 10 friends around, you all know when you wake up the next morning and you walk into your kitchen and it looks like an absolute bomb site. And that's because things don't have homes, things get a little bit crazy. But if you have some preparation, you can make sure you're making martinis into the small hours and nothing gets out of hand. The second rule of thumb is mise en place. Mise en place, one of my most favorite things to say. It's a French culinary term from the chefing world, and it means everything in its place. It's essentially preparation, 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 preparation. It means to have your ice ready to go, pre-portioned. It means to have your equipment nicely displayed, easily where you can access it, where you can put it back when you're done with it. It means to have all of your homemade syrups and infusions done the day before, 2 days before, a week before. Making sure you're preparing for hosting, and then hosting becomes so much easier. And throughout this series, we're going to be talking about homemade ingredients and how you can prepare those ahead of time. Additionally, how you can create cocktails en masse for groups of 4, 6, 8 people without really breaking a sweat. So before we get into everything, I think it's good to really just talk about the different types of tools there are and what they do in the home bar environment. So first of all, let's talk about the star of the show, the vessels that you actually mix drinks in, the cocktail shaker. Now the cocktail shaker, there's a cobbler 3-piece shaker, there's a 2-part tin on tin, there's a glass on tin, there's a Parisian shaker. There's so many different scary words, but you just need to know the purpose of a shaker is to seal a cocktail within a vessel with ice, to shake it as hard as you can, and the idea there is to get aeration and dilution and drop that temperature as rapidly as possible. And so I've got 2 shakers here to kind of talk through, but if you can't get a shaker, I have made cocktails in like a protein shaker. I've made cocktails in a mason jar. There really is no limit to what you can use. A jam jar will even do the job. Because we're being fancy, let's talk about the professional tools. So first of all, we have the cobbler shaker, or the 3-piece shaker. So this is comprised of 3 parts. You've got your cap, which can double up as a measure. You've got the top, which essentially is your built-in strainer, which is quite handy. And then you have your base, which holds most of the liquid. 3-piece shaker. When you're storing this ad hoc during service or during your dinner party, store it like on a tea towel, upside down like this, so everything is kind of draining and nothing stays wet. These pieces of equipment are made from stainless steel. They're not designed to rust. This one's been gold plated because I'm fancy. But keeping it in a moisture-free environment when it's not in use is really important. So just upside down like this. What you do is you add your ingredients to here, cap it with the top, and then the last piece of the puzzle is add the top. If you add the cap beforehand, it's not going to seal properly because of the air pressure. So it's always 1, 2, 3, like so. You don't need to whack it down. If you whack it down, it's going to be very hard to break. Essentially, because this is all made of metal, once you add ice and start shaking, the metal's going to contract and create the seal. You just want to make sure that you've got fingers on the bottom and fingers on the top, and when you're shaking, it's going to hold it all together. That's the cobbler shaker. Next up, we have got our tin on tin 2-piece shaker. This is a Koriko from Japan, and this one feels very simple. This one is a little bit more complicated. You'll see this one in most bars because it does require a separate strainer to get the liquid out of the tin. But the benefits of this are you can probably make 2 cocktails at once. Sometimes, depending on the volume, 3 cocktails at once, because you can get more volume in there. It also gives you a lot of flexibility. Having just metal vessels that are incredibly flexible and versatile are just useful to have at home. So this one, is very simple. You always build your drink in the short tin and then cap it with the tall tin. And when you cap it, you want to make sure that you've got a straight edge along one side and the angle on the other. So if you're looking at it down the camera, you've got a nice little clock with 12 o'clock with the biggest edge and 6 o'clock being the no gap whatsoever. When you do put these together, you want to give it a gentle tap. Don't give it a big thwack, because when it contracts again from the temperature, when you start shaking, it's going to be very hard to break. Then you have one hand on the top, one hand on the bottom, just keeping it all together. And you shake with the open segment facing over your shoulder. And we'll kind of get into an example of that when we start making drinks. But over your shoulder, just like so. There's no right or wrong way to shake. I've seen people shake like this, which is a very unusual technique, but it does the job. One-handed, over the shoulder. Some people just shake with a nice little 3-point shake. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you're being very fancy, it really doesn't matter as long as you're doing the right thing, and that's pulling your shaker face. The whole endeavor should be quite strenuous. You're trying to inject energy from your whole body into that drink. By injecting the energy into that drink, you're going to be breaking down the ice. You're going to be dropping that temperature rapidly, getting it nice and cold and nice and wet. And so if you're not pulling some kind of arduous shake face whilst you're going for it, you're doing it wrong. If you're not putting your effort in and you're not pulling that shaker face, you're not going to get a very good cocktail. Last but not least, we should talk about the humble mixing glass. Now, this is a mixing glass. Ain't she a beauty? A mixing glass is just a solid, weighty jug that has some kind of a base that you can hold, that when you start stirring a cocktail, it's not going to go anywhere. And so mixing glasses are when you don't want to agitate the liquid so much that you get air into it, like a shaken cocktail, if you're thinking your classic margaritas, your white ladies, anything that's going to be nice and fresh and zippy. If you want something more sophisticated and rounded without that kind of aeration and also retain that clarity, you want to use a mixing glass for stirring. And so this is the perfect example of what you would use to make a martini. Sorry, you Americans, I know you love a shaken martini, and whilst it's not wrong, there is the OG. Martinis, Negronis, Martinez, a whole host of classic cocktails require a mixing glass. And with a mixing glass, you need a mixing spoon. The only thing to note with a mixing glass, make sure you've got one with a good lip, something that's rounded, that's not going to dribble out, a little pouring spout. The old classic 1950s martini jugs are also perfect for this as well. So bar spoons or mixing spoons, they're a little bit fancy, let's be honest. I think most consumers or customers at the bar are always very curious about this kind of fancy bit of equipment. We've got a whole host of bar spoons. Some of them have got like a nice trident fork on the end for kind of skewering garnishes, utterly useless. Some have got a nice kind of flat bevel on the bottom for muddling and breaking down ingredients in your glass. Not so bad, especially when you're making an old fashioned. But I would say these teardrop boys with the nice kind of little neutral end on the end are fantastic for making cocktails. And the whole idea of a bar spoon is to stir your cocktail. So just to give you an example here, I'm gonna use my fingers because I'm in my home bar. You add your ice into your mixing glass. And you stir like this. So it's all in the wrist. It requires a little bit of practice. And you notice I'm using the spoon side down. With that spoon, it's kind of edging around the inner rim of that glass. And as we're doing it, it's slowly chilling down the glass. You can see the glass frosting up. And it's adding dilution without adding air into your cocktail. If you're a beginner and this whole kind of semi-held position with the spoon twirling in your hand is too challenging, you can always use the back end of the spoon, which is a lot easier. It ain't as fancy, but it does the job. So that's the humble bar spoon. The only other question I get asked is, why does it have a coil in it? You can actually get right-handed and left-handed bar spoons depending on which way around the coil is running. The coil is useful, so it helps it spin in your fingers to create a nice, smooth, professional action. And damn, you look so cool when you're making a martini. But also, it's very useful when you're building a highball and you want to pour your mixer down the spoon without creating too much aeration or bubbles into it. And that's really great for like a gin and tonic or a French 75 or a Tom Collins, all of which we'll be talking about a little bit later on. Bar spoons, very exciting. So we spoke about our mixing vessels and we spoke about bar spoons, but of course, you need to get your liquid out of the vessels. And with a 3-piece cobbler shaker, that strainer is built in, but there are multiple strainers for different techniques. And so I thought I'd just cover them all very, very loosely to talk about glossary of terms here. So this is what we would call a Hawthorne strainer. Hawthorne strainers have got this lovely spring inside, and these are fantastic for straining out of your 2-piece shakers, these bad boys. Hawthorne strainers are very useful because they will completely cover the top of your mixing tin. They're going to capture all of your ice shards, all your main kind of big bulky bits of ice. If you're shaking with any fresh fruit or vegetables or herbs, it's going to capture that as well. But it's not going to capture any kind of like fine particulate matter. So like tiny shards of ice or like little flecks of mint leaves or whatnot. And so that's why you need your second strainer, which is your tea strainer or your fine strainer. This beautiful fine mesh strainer is going to be that secondary strainer. So when you're straining into a cocktail, it's kind of like so. This one over the glass and this one pouring from your tin. So please note here, this is a 2-handed operation. You've got one hand holding the tin and then using this little tab on the Hawthorne to hold the Hawthorne intact, pressing it into the rim so that the spring sits flush against the metal, and then the second strainer holding onto the fine mesh sieve. Sometimes the sieve takes a little bit longer to strain because it's quite fine, and so a little gentle tap, 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 tap is a really great way to kind of push that liquid through. So the final piece of the puzzle is the julep strainer, which is probably the oldest strainer in the world in terms of historical relevance. The julep strainer is this beautiful thing of beauty. Originally this was for its namesake drink called the julep, which was a whiskey, sugar, mint concoction with loads and loads of crushed ice. This was before the advent of straws, and this was designed to hold back the ice so you could drink through it directly from the vessel, kind of like that. Nowadays, we use a julep strainer for straining stirred cocktails because there's nothing, you're not shaking it, you're not going to get any fine ice shards, you're not going to get any kind of particulate matter from destroying any fruit with the ice. So into your mixing glass is perfect, hold it against the ice and straining through, like so. So we have our 3 strainers, our julep strainer, our Hawthorne strainer, and our fine mesh strainer. Ain't that exciting? Whilst we're here, I thought I'd just talk a little bit more practically about this 3-piece cobbler shaker. Bearing in mind we have a built-in basic rough strainer in the top. When you finish shaking your cocktail, you just remove the top piece and then you can strain directly into the glass. If you've got any kind of fine pieces, you can use your fine mesh strainer to strain directly through that to capture any kind of shards. And Bob is your uncle. So with a 3-piece shaker, you're really cutting out the middleman of having to use a Hawthorne or a julep, which is handy for some, although sometimes can be a little bit cumbersome. So choose your own adventure. So we've learned the basics of cocktail vessels, mixology, straining, but now I guess we need to talk about measurements. And we really can't talk about how you measure cocktails before we talk about why we measure cocktails. I feel like the whole idea of recipes and measuring cocktails is the most daunting part for home bartenders and people wanting to get into it. So I like to think that recipes are there as a guide, but then you need to kind of follow your own intuition and your own balance. You can never make one cocktail, let's say one gin sour, for 10 people with the same recipe and they all think it's perfectly balanced. The individual palate is unique, and so everybody likes it a little bit here or there, and so Measurements are fantastic for a really great foundation for building a recipe, but then you got to kind of run with it and go your own direction. So for the rest of this series, I'm going to be talking about recipes in milliliters, ounces, and parts. And we do that because the American system is, of course, the fantastic imperial system. We have that in the UK, but for some reason when we're talking about cocktails in the UK, we talk about metric system, which obviously is far superior. But I think in general, to keep things nice and simple, we're going to also reference parts, because you might not have a fancy jigger at home. You might just have an egg cup or a shot glass. And with that, you can still make fantastic cocktails because we're breaking it down to fundamental parts, 2 parts this, 1 part this, half a part of this, and you kind of just follow your own intuition. So what are those different tools you can use to measure cocktails at home? So first of all, there's spoons, teaspoon, tablespoon, bar spoon. You know, a bar spoon is either 2.5 or 5 mils, depending on the size of it. You've got what we lovingly refer to as a jigger. A jigger is actually a very old-fashioned unit of measurement in cocktails. But now the piece of equipment that used to measure jiggers is now referred to as a jigger. So this is a jigger. Jiggers normally have 2 parts, a big part and a small part. This is also a jigger. This is a graduated jigger with lots of individual measurements at the side. So you've got 15 mils, half an ounce, 20 mils, which is roughly 3/4 of an ounce, 30 mils, 1 ounce, so on and so forth. Then you've also got something you find in most kitchen staples, measuring spoons. These are fantastic. Measuring spoons normally go up to 1 tablespoon or 15 mils, so that's half an ounce. It's a very practical unit of measurement if you don't have any jiggers. My favorite one personally is the kitchen scales, because this is going to help you with your cocktail making, but also your ingredient making. And I feel like if you bring everything down to the base unit being grams, because we're metric files over here, it makes things a lot easier. Last but not least, I want to cover a few other basic bar tools. And these are kind of like the miscellaneous ones, but I think it's good to have in your pantry for when it's needed. First of all, the tools needed to open bottles. Obviously very important if you're going to be making drinks. First of all, you've got your bar blade, or any kind of basic bottle opener. Bar blades are incredibly versatile, good to have in your back pocket, and just doing this stupid little trick here makes you feel very cool. Secondly, you have got your wine knife or waiter's friend. When we're making cocktails with wine or vermouth or anything with a cork in it, incredibly useful. It has a built-in bottle opener for your crown caps. It's got a blade for opening the foil of your wine, and of course it's got the corkscrew for getting into that. Aside from your openers, a few other miscellaneous tools. You've got a muddler. A muddler does exactly what it says on the tin, it muddles things. So say you want to start extracting flavors out of whole fruit and whatnot into your glass, you can put your citrus wedges or fresh berries into the base of a cocktail shaker or a glass and just press it gently to extract those oils and juices. This is exactly what a muddler does. This is really iconic for your famous drinks like a mojito or a caipirinha. Aside from that, you've got your citrus squeezer, lovingly referred to as a Mexican elbow because of how popular margaritas are, and fresh citrus is always best. Now, when we're talking citrus, if you ever purchase one of those little plastic lemons or limes from the supermarket, you can just get in the bin straight away. We don't want that. We want fresh citrus straight from your mother's garden. So the citrus squeezer opens up, you place half a citrus in there and squeeze the juice fresh. Now, we mentioned mise en place earlier on and preparing things. You can juice citrus ahead of time, but be sure not to keep it for any longer than 24 hours. And finally, we need to talk about the pointy things. Sharp and pointy and dangerous things. The most important things, of course, to have in your bar are knives. Different kinds of knives for different purposes. This one's a bit ridiculous, but pretty awesome. This is a noodle knife. But you need a knife with a sharp, strong blade that you sharpen regularly. The most accidents in the kitchen happen when you're using a dull blade, and as we all know, lemons, limes, and oranges, the kind of most prevalent fruits used in bartending, all have quite a tough skin. So a nice, sharp paring knife where you can get some beautiful garnishes. This guy, the Victorinox kind of classic staple bar knife, incredibly sharp and really great for kind of slicing through bits and bobs. And then something big and chunky that you're going to use to kind of break down ice. If you do want to kind of level up your cocktail mixology game at home, we're going to be talking about how to prepare some fantastic ice at home. So you've got a nice big cleaver, any kind of cleaver will do. Something sharp and pointy, little ice prongs kind of chipping away the corners of your ice blocks. And if you're feeling really awesome, a nice Japanese ice saw, which looks super specialist, but you can get it from your favorite online retailer. And have something as badass as this at your next cocktail party. I think that's it, guys. We've covered pretty much everything you guys need. I guess whilst I'm looking around here, one thing I keep doing as we're resetting is cleaning up as I go, which we mentioned before. And so a nice dry tea towel, always on hand to mop up any wet patches, keeping your drink making station professional and legit. Always good to know.